Hi everyone, I want to talk to you about loops in Java. And one of the things you need to understand before you get into loops is the idea of multiple assignments with variables. So this is one of the great things about variables is you can keep changing the value. So when you create a variable, you name it, you give it a location, and so it's just like a bucket or a place to hold a value, and that value can change. And it's very helpful in coding to understand that concept. So you can see right here, it was 11 earlier, and I checked the time again, and now the time is 2, so I put 2 in the hour bucket instead. So let's see how that looks. So what happens to code is it executes one line at a time. So at first, I set the integer to hour. I created an integer and I set the named hour, and I set the value inside that variable as 11. So you can see over here we have the hour, and we have we're assigning it a value of 11. So those are together now, and I did that all in one line of code because I like to be very efficient. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the hour to 2. So now you can see it switched to 2 over here, and so the hour variable now has a value of 2. The other thing I want you to notice is that I didn't have to use int again because it was already created. You only have to give the type when you first create the variable. Once that has happened, you can just reassign the value. Okay, so iteration is also a concept that you have to understand with loops, and iteration is just repeating identical or similar tasks. And if you think about, how Henry Ford, when he was doing assembly lines, that was sort of a process of iteration. Like one person just kept doing the same task over and over again, and computers are great with iteration. So the first kind of a loop we're going to study is a while loop. And so this loop continues while the condition is true. And this is what a while loop looks like, and I want to have you focus on a few key parts of the format. So first of all, the curly braces, and I've color-coded just so you can see. So the curly brace, this is the opening, and this is the closing. And everything inside here is the body of your loop, and notice it is indented. So the other thing I want you to notice is after you have the while, you have parentheses, and inside those parentheses are the condition that you're checking. So that's your test area right there. You want that condition to be true. While that's true, you're going to execute this code that happens to appear between the curly braces. All right, the other thing I want you to notice is that there is a multiple assignment in here. So this is taking n, and it's changing it. It's going to say n minus 1. So this is decreasing the value of n, and that's going to be called decrement, which you'll learn in a moment. And it's important to do that because otherwise, if we didn't have this line of code in here, and if n was the number 1, your code would be an infinite loop. It would continue on and on and on and on and on, and it wouldn't work because there's no way to get out of it. So you have to, when you have a condition, a while condition, you have to do something to what you're testing. Otherwise, if you don't change the value, then you'll be stuck in a forever ending loop. And the last thing is the alignment. So you can see everything that's in the while loop is indented. So this is about 5 spaces in, and it's automatically indented. And then my closing brace has to align with the W in while. So it's really important. This is going to be inside of your code, and so if you're not indenting, it's hard to tell where the loop starts and where it stops, and it's really hard to trace your code back. So alignment is critical once you start getting into loops, which is why we were practicing before we got to loops. So we're going to go through a while loop example right now. And so before you even start your while loop, you have to have a value for your condition. So we're setting this condition equal to 10, so we have a 10 over here. And now we're going to move on. So now it's going to test the condition. Okay, so we have n is 10. It's going to say, okay, is 10, or the value of n, is that variable greater than 0? Well, the variable has a value of 10. 10 is greater than 0. So I'm going to pop down to the next line of code, which says I'm going to print variable n, which has a value of 10. So over here, the yellow box is going to be my output screen. So we have a 10 there. Now we go down to this code where we have to change what n is, so we won't be in an infinite loop. And so n equals n minus 1, so if n is 10, so 10 minus 1, so I think it's going to be 9. So you can see that now I have changed the assignment of n to be 9. And then it goes back up to check the while. So is 9 greater than 0? Yes, it is. So then it's going to print that 9, and then it's going to move down, and it's going to reduce n by 1. So it's going to make n 8. And then we're going to go back up. So we're going to just fast forward because we don't want to be here forever. So we're now assuming that we're now at n being equal to 1. So is 1 greater than 0? Yes. So I'm going to still go in my while loop code. I go to the body of the code. So I print line n, so I'm going to print a 1. And then I'm going to subtract 1 from 1. So I'm going to get a 0, and I pop back up to my while loop. So now, is n greater than 0? Nope, 0 is not greater than 0. So I'm going to drop down outside of the while loop. So because my while loop started here, and my curly brace shows where it ends, the next line of code underneath is where I'm going to pop down to. And this happens to be a print line that's going to say blast off. And so blast off prints down here in my output, and I'm done with that while loop. So increment, you can make changes to your variable by making it count up or move up in some way. And then decrement is to go down. You can do you can multiply, you can divide. There's lots of different ways to adjust your variable, but you're either going up or you're going down. And now we're going to look at for loops. And so a for loop continues for a set period of time. And so we're going to put all of that in the loop statement. So here we go is the beginning. This is what it looks like, and these are all the different parts to it. So we're going to go through each part for a for loop. So the first thing I want you to notice is, again, there's curly braces, and that shows where your loop code begins and ends. So those are very important. So your body is inside those curly braces always. The next thing I want you to notice is the semicolons. All of these statements, the initializing statement then has a semicolon, a condition statement then has a semicolon, and then your increment or decrementer is right after. So if you don't have these two semicolons in here, it's not going to work. These semicolons separate those three major pieces of your for loop, and many a student has been frustrated that their code didn't work, and it was just because of the semicolon. So make sure you separate with semicolons. Okay, the initializer, which is the first part of your for statement, is what you set your counter to. So this is going to be the counter. You're gonna give it some type of number here, and so that's why they call the initializing statement. This gets used once and only once. You don't go back to it. So your condition is the next part, and that's what you're testing for. It's sort of what you had in your while loop. So this is the condition that you're going to test for. And then the last piece in your for loop is the incrementer or a decrementer, and that's going to increase or decrease your count variable. So this is going to make a change to your initialized variable over here. And then the last thing I want you to notice is to do the alignment. So again, the body is going to align. It's going to be indented underneath all of the code. There can be lots of lines of code inside a for loop, and it all needs to be indented. And then you also need to make sure you align your curly brace with the F in for. That's, again, critical. Same reason for the while loops. All right, so here is our for loop example. And what I want to go through is show you the order in which the code executes in a for loop. So it can be a little bit confusing. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to initialize the value. So in this one, n is going to be equal to 10. The second thing you do is you're going to check, you're going to test for the condition. You're going to make sure that that condition is valid. And if it's valid, you're going to pop down to execute the code. If there are multiple lines of code, you're going to go one at a time until you get to the bottom. And then you're going to pop back up and you're going to adjust your value. So you're going to make another assignment to your value. You're either going to increase it or decrease it or change it in some way so that your loop, you'll eventually get out of your loop. And then once that's done, then you're going to move on and you're going to pop out of the code and you're going to know where it ends because of the curly brace, and then you're going to execute the rest of your code. So that's the order of the for loop. Now we're going to go through the example. So the first step is, again, we're initializing and we're doing the countdown code just like they talked about in the book. So n is going to be set to 10 here. So we're going to put the value over here so you can always see what the variable is going to look like, and this is going to be our output screen. Then you're going to move over to the test. Is variable n, which is set equal to 10, greater than 0? Yes, it is. So we're going to pop down to our print line statement, and so now we have the 10 printing out on our screen. And then we're going to pop back up to reassign the value. So now we're going to say n equals n minus 1, so n is now 9. And we move over to the test. Is 9 greater than 0? Yes. We move down to the code, to the body of the code. So we're going to print a 9. And then we move back up to reassign the value. So we're going to do n is equal to 9 minus 1. And so that's going to be 8. So now we're going to fast forward again, because again, you don't want to be here forever. And we're going back to the test. We're assuming now that n is 1. So is 1 greater than 0? Yes. Pop down to the body of the code, and we're going to print 1. Pop up to reassign the value. So we're going to say 1 minus 1 is going to be the new n value. So that's going to be 0. We go over to the test. Is 0, which is n, is 0 greater than 0? No, it's not. So it's going to go down to the print line statement. It's going to print blast off. So as you can see from the output, you ended up with 2 identical pieces of code using 2 different loops. And you're going to get to practice those and hopefully perfect those. And I hope that this helps you understand how the 2 different loops work.